Hi, it's Nicole, and today I wanted to start what I hope will be an interesting and maybe slightly different discussion about book covers. Since reading more and more books in French, I've noticed a cover trend where a lot of the French covers tend to be very plain. There is Gallimard, who does like a white kind of collection. Stock has plain blue. And there are some other ones that have like just the plain cream and maybe a red border or something like that, but they're all very plain, and it feels a little bit like that scene in American Psycho where they're all comparing their business cards. This is obviously in stark contrast to what we see a lot of the time in the Anglophone world, where covers are like all sorts of different colors or illustrated, or there are photos or just interesting things happening with typography design. And then we have the whole thing of like cover buys, where you see a cover that's just really beautiful and you have no idea what the book is about, but you buy it anyway because you really love that cover. And that just doesn't really happen so much around a lot of the traditional austere French covers, and this just seems so bizarre to me, coming from obviously my perspective from the Anglophone world where we have all of these flashy covers. And I thought I'd look into it, and I found several articles that talked about it, but one of them was quite a short article in English, which I'll put below, and that was really interesting, though very biased in favor of the Anglophone model. And then there was another much lengthier article in French that was I felt it was a little bit more balanced overall, and it kind of goes into the history of why French books are sort of like that, and their theories about book covers and literature in general. And although the French article does lean in favor of the French model, I felt like overall it was a lot more in-depth and gave me more to think about in this whole where I lean sort of thing. And at the moment I don't know where I lean still. To give a really broad overview, the French model seems to prioritize the word itself. Traditionally, it doesn't like the flashiness of having an illustrated or highly graphic or visual cover that would feel like it detracts from the word. Literature should be able to stand on its own without needing to be sold to whatever public. From a graphic design point of view, I can see an argument for both sides, because I think the austere covers in themselves can probably be like the American Psycho business card scene, really well designed and all of that stuff in a very minimalist way that's interesting for its own reasons, in the same way that the typeface Helvetica is interesting and used in many places for many things, and type nerds go crazy over it. But those aren't things that connect to the general public. And therein sort of lies the problem. And there is an idea of these kinds of austere covers feeling a little bit elitist. I think on the one hand, I really like the idea of it being about the literature itself, about the story or the concepts and all of that themselves. But on the other hand, I like the democratization of literature, I suppose. And I guess I feel like if adding some more graphic interest can help to attract a new audience, I feel like it's better to have something that can reach across those boundaries. But then I also feel like those boundaries, being socially constructed, should be a lot easier to break down without having to destroy that visual model and that concept of the word being the powerful thing. So what do I actually mean by that? This feels really hard to explain, actually, and to explain in order. So apparently Livre de Poche was one of the first, if not the first, I think, publishers to kind of break the mold by doing more Americanized, sort of flashy, highly illustrated covers that aimed to attract a more mass market audience. And I think you can still see this in a lot of the books that they produce now. A lot of my Amélie Nothomb books are from that publisher, and you can see that those covers are a lot flashier than some of the other covers that I showed at the beginning of this video. But I think this all goes even deeper than literature and elitism in reading and those kinds of things. It also is fed by the differences between having a more capitalist system versus having a system that is in some way different from that. So one of the things that came up in the lengthier article in French is that in America, for example, a lot of the time books are being bought through other means than directly in bookshops, as far as I can understand, or from what this article claims. And this article was written a few years ago, so maybe things have changed by now. I don't know. Basically, books that are not being sold specifically in a bookshop are having to compete against other objects that are outside of the book realms. They're having to shout out to customers a lot more than they would do if they were in a bookshop where people are there to buy books. So I think that's part of it, or at least that's what the second article that I read talked about, how the American system, being a lot more capitalist, sort of makes books work harder as objects to attract customers to be readers, whereas in France, where literature is considered an integral part of the culture, the feeling, the sentiment towards books and reading is a little bit different, and bookshops are not so much having that same kind of struggle over there and don't need to seduce readers in the same way as in a lot of Anglophone countries. Obviously, I think that the elitism that can sometimes come with the French model is not something that I get on with very well at all, but I think the result of these really austere covers is interesting as well, because I think, for me anyway, it certainly makes them a little bit less like collectible objects, which actually kind of appeals to me in the way that I think about books naturally anyway. Although I am a visual artist and I really appreciate a well-designed cover or beautiful illustration, I also don't put a lot of heavy importance on the book as an object, and I feel like anything that encourages me to do that I'm not really that comfortable with. So in a way, something that kind of strips the book of that kind of feel and doesn't encourage me to collect it just because it's beautiful, or doesn't encourage me to keep it even though I didn't particularly like it just because it feels like a shame to throw it away, is something that I actually quite like. And I wonder if it maybe does make readers subconsciously maybe focus more on the content, and maybe in that way taking away some of that superficial, for lack of a better term, interest to a book might kind of refocus the purpose of having that book in the first place. On the other hand, I don't think that cover buys are always some terrible thing. I think in a lot of ways it does allow people to branch out and try something that they never would have just because they randomly picked up a beautiful book. So personally, I kind of am stuck between the two, and I would like the two to exist. And I really like that France has this kind of culture that is so different. I guess maybe that does go back to the kinds of really strong socialist roots that it has, perhaps. Or maybe just the way in which its culture has been constructed over time. I don't know. But I find those differences really, really interesting. And I personally find it very difficult to come down really heavy on one side or another of this particular argument. I think with this kind of thing, because of what we're just used to seeing and what we've come to like, it's really hard to see the other side as being also valid and worth considering. But if you can put aside any biases that you might have in favor of covers, because statistically speaking, I think most people that watch this will be more familiar with the English-speaking Americanized cover story, and will probably be in favor of that. I think it would be interesting to consider the other side a little bit more. Within this little discovery of mine, I felt like there were a lot of things that I wanted to discuss, because I think it does touch on loads of different elements of even the way that we build our societies and how we see books as objects in need of marketing, or as collections of ideas that should speak for themselves or whatever. I find all of that really, really interesting, and wanted to just kind of get that out there. And I don't think this is the best organized form of me doing that, but I hope that this is just maybe a little opener to what could be a more interesting discussion later on, or maybe just in the comments of this video. If you have anything else that you'd like to add or ask about that, or tell me that I didn't bring up or anything, I would love to hear it. I know a lot of people that follow my channel don't necessarily read French, but I'm going to leave the French article that was a lot more in-depth down below in the description box as well, because it was really good, and I think that your browser will probably just automatically translate it for you anyway. If not, there's always Google Translate. I hope this discussion opened up a new topic that maybe you hadn't thought about before, and that's pretty much all I wanted to say for today. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.